everybody, this is Don with the Vlog of Many Things, and today is my last Friday collaboration video with Joe the Lawyer, Erik Tenkar from Tenkar's Tavern, and Joe Bloch, the Greyhawk Grognard. And in today's subject, the Friday topic is talking about what older D&D modules or what older versions of D&D taught players. Was it really educational? What can you learn from older D&D if you're a fan of 5e? So I want to go ahead and kind of chime in. In all fairness, I have not watched Joe Bloch's video, Erik's video, or Joe the Lawyer's yet because I wanted to kind of have my own take on this. And I might kind of go a little bit out of order because I think that older versions of D&D have an awful lot to offer. Um, you know, I know that a lot of people have a lot of heartfelt feelings about what edition is better. And even if you like a newer version of D&D better than an older, or maybe if you like an older version of D&D better than a newer, I think you can learn a lot from different versions. But I think especially that applies to people who play newer versions of Dungeons and Dragons. They, I think, can get a lot more out of the older stuff than what they really realize. And the reason why is because in the early days of D&D, it was kind of like a wild, wild west. And the earlier versions, the creators of D&D learned very early on that, wargaming, tabletop wargaming was a very complicated technical thing. And Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson and company wanted D&D to be fun and simple, theater of the mind type thing. And they learned very early on that it was becoming a little complicated for players because players were kind of winging it. There was no real instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3. So what ended up happening is Gary Gygax brought in people like Mike Carr. Mike Carr was an educator. He wrote a module called B1. It's numbered B1, Search of the Unknown. And Mike Carr had a heavy educator background. So Mike Carr was a real good guy to get in there to talk about the basics. And that's exactly what he did in Search of the Unknown. He talked about things like having a caller, about marching orders. He went in to talk about, how do I want to put this? How you get into the meat of the adventure, how you need graph paper. And when you look at B1, it's literally like the first 4 or 5 pages of the module. You're not reading about the module. He's talking to you about the really core basics of playing the game. And then you get into things like BECME, BECME, which stands for Basic, Expert, Companion, Masters, and Immortal, was a series of box sets put out in the 80s. And the first box set, which is Basic, which is the red box, when you go into the player's booklet and the DM's booklet, they get right into the basics on how to play the game step by step. As a matter of fact, they even have a sample adventure in there that is extremely easy to play and really kind of gives you a mindset on how to play the game. They were games that were very centered on teaching the players the basics and doing so in a manner that was simple to understand. So, and then you get into other ones that were prior to BECME, such as Basic and Advanced BX. These also very clearly explained the basics. And I think that's the key thing. I think today D&D is very complicated. You got players' handbooks that are literally that thick and DMGs, and then you have multiple players' handbooks and multiple DMGs. And sometimes the rules overlap each other and it can become very confusing. Another really great module is the Veiled Society. I believe it's B6. B6 really taught in detail how to role play, how to move around in a city-based environment. And again, with emphasis on how to role play, how to actually role play, the core basic of D&D. And it was very, very good at teaching some basic mechanics of a new thing, and that was political intrigue. And again, this was all done in a really basic and fundamental manner. And then in the 80s, there's another and I got it up there, and I should pull it down. It was called Ghost of Lion Castle. It was produced, I think, in 83 or 84, and it taught players in a really simple manner how to solo adventure without a DM. So the early modules for D&D really taught players the basics. It got in, it teaches you the core basics of, you know, without getting complicated, that you need graph paper, that you need somebody to call out or lead the party. You need a mapper. How do you deal with political intrigue? How do you role play properly and that type of thing? And I know that 5e kind of gets into a little bit of that, but I think what you learn from the basics of D&D are just that, the basics, when you go back to the beginnings of it. And also, best of all, I think earlier forms of D&D did something very unique. It basically turned imagination, rules, and consequences into a living classroom for players. And players didn't even realize you were learning. you know um we didn't have computers back then. We didn't have iPads. What we did was it taught the basics of engaging with other people face to face. It taught basic social skills, basic math. I mean, I can go on and on what it actually taught. But again, it's that imagination plus rules plus consequences that I really think D&D early on was a living classroom, and that's what taught players a lot about the basics. um, Even if you get into advanced D&D, again, it gets into more of explaining, although it's much more complicated. I think that what you could do with AD&D is you could actually skip it. You could actually go from OD&D from the early to mid 70s, skip AD&D and get into BX, basic expert, and then into BECME, and in the associated modules that go along with it. I am sure my other bloggers that are doing this collaboration with me are going to probably talk about B1, maybe even B2, because um, again, B1, especially with Mike Carr and his educator background, that really went ahead and that really helped players understand it, because Mike Carr was a teacher, so he knew how to talk to students. And on top of that, there's just a whole bunch of other great modules, and you can learn things like, as an example, by going through them, how to more easily, in a more fundamental manner, do things like traps and riddles, and I know there's modern books out there that do all that, but I think AD and or excuse me, I think OD&D from the 70s and into the 80s, although did that also, I think it did it more in a fundamental manner. So this is Don with Blog of Many Things. Again, this is a collab video with Joe the Lawyer, Erik Tenkar from Tenkar's Tavern, and Joe Bloch, the Greyhawk Grognard. Hope you got something out of it. I just kept it brief because really, really, this is just a subject that we could really go down a rabbit hole on. But so thanks for tuning in my video, and I'll link everybody's channel down below, and take it easy.